I'm an investigative journalist with a special interest in unsolved homicides and missing persons cases. I need help with a case. Hey, no sleep. I'm not totally sure how to start this, so I guess I'll just jump in. I'm a journalist on a true crime podcast with a major radio network in the US. I'm not going to give you more information than that because there's a not insignificant chance you've at least heard of my show, and I'm not interested in giving up my anonymity or risking my job, hence the throwaway account. My usual Reddit account is not very anonymous, but I have this case I'm working on right now and, honestly, it's got me stumped. I'm hoping if I share some of it here, y'all might have some ideas for me. I'm one of the hosts on this true crime podcast that mostly covers unsolved homicides and missing persons cases. I have a public email address that I share on every episode and in the show notes, so people can send me stories and leads and stuff. I get a lot of emails, and to be honest, I write a lot of them off as bogus, but I do get good ones that I end up researching and recording episodes on. The podcast is billed as investigative journalism, but I don't honestly do a lot of investigating. I do internet research, I call local police departments and other sources, I wheedle information out of anyone I can, but I don't do any boots on the ground investigating. Until recently. I'm going to tell this story with fake people and place names because it's easier than using vague pronouns. So let's say this takes place in a little New England town called Kent, Massachusetts. This particular email came in late at night, when I was about to shut the computer and go to bed. I've been doing this for nearly 4 years, and my podcast, more because of the notoriety of the network than me, has a pretty big following, so I'm no stranger to disturbing, gory emails. But the further I read this email, the more gruesome the story got. My attention was initially struck by a link that read, using a fake website here obviously. A link. I clicked the link before I read the email, but it was just a blurb, not even a full article, from 6 years ago. The trial for the triple homicide of Kent High School students Ashley Breyer, 18, Rose Thorpe, 17, and Matthew Ryan, 17, on the night of October 31, 2012, comes to a screeching halt as Victor Knight, age 11, is acquitted for the crime after the defense presented screenshots and data logs proving that Knight was playing a video game online at the time the crime was committed. No other suspects have been brought forth at this time. More tonight at 8. I sat back in my desk chair, dumbfounded. A triple homicide, 7 years ago, less than 100 miles away from where I was currently sitting, and an 11-year-old boy was the primary suspect. How had I never heard about this? 7 years ago I was a freshman in college, taking my first journalism course at UMass Hopkinton, even closer to Kent than where I live now. I couldn't believe we never talked about this case. The article was frustratingly short and I was about to start furiously Googling when I remembered there was an actual email waiting for me. I went back to it, and at first I was sure it was from a kid, maybe a high schooler doing a school project who came across the story. I get more of those than you might expect. But I realized pretty quickly that this email didn't come from a kid, it came from a cop. And not just any cop, it was from one of the responding officers to the initial 911 call that reported the bodies, Jerry O'Rourke. This case broke me. I thought once the FBI took over, I could shake it and move on, but I never got those faces, that heinous crime scene, out of my head. I still take pills to sleep. That got me. It's not often you hear a cop confess to being screwed up by a case, or by anything, actually. In his email, Jerry explained that he was 48 when the crime occurred, and planned to stay on the force until he was required to retire at age 65. He liked being a police officer and felt that he was doing really good work for his community. Then this crime happened. He was writing to me on the night of his 55th birthday, when he became eligible for maximum pension benefits and immediately retired. Jerry gave me a brief rundown of the case. Around 8 in the morning of November 1, 2015, an elderly lady was walking her dog in the woods behind her house. She came across what she first thought was the leftovers of a Halloween prank, because of the way the bodies were posed and dressed, until she got close enough. It was 3 students from the local high school, Ashley Breyer, Rose Thorpe, and Matthew Ryan. All 3 were seniors and heavily involved in varsity football and cheerleading. It was, as Jerry said, a heinous crime scene, although it was even worse than I knew from that initial email. Ashley and Rose were wearing their cheerleading uniforms, holding their pom-poms, arms stuck out in cheerleader Y ways. Matt was wearing his football jersey, pads, and helmet, and had a football tucked under one arm. All 3 of them bore evidence of brutal, fatal wounds to their heads, necks, and torsos. Within a few weeks, an 11-year-old boy was arrested for the murders. Jerry didn't go into details about Victor Knight's arrest, simply saying that they had a decent case against him. But when the case went to court, the defense turned up something that the police had missed, or not bothered to look for in the first place. Victor had an airtight alibi. The night that the crime was committed, Victor was playing video games in his room. But he wasn't just playing Xbox by himself, he was playing an online multiplayer game while video chatting with friends. The game generated a log which proved not only that Victor was logged in at the time of the murder, but that he was actively playing, meaning that he wasn't logged in but actually off committing a triple homicide. Furthermore, his friends had multiple screen grabs of the video chat, showing Victor's face with timestamps proving he was sitting at his desk playing a video game when the murders occurred. So Victor was acquitted, and there were no other suspects. The case went cold. I ravaged the internet for any more information, but there was shockingly little. You would think that such a strange and gruesome case would garner national attention, but you'd be surprised by how many horrible murder cases go with very little media coverage. What was really strange to me was that there was almost nothing on the Kent, Massachusetts website, which seemed to be a pretty solid news source otherwise. How was this not all over the local news? I leaned back in my chair and rubbed bleary eyes. It was almost 3 a.m. I sent Jerry O'Rourke a response saying I'd be in town tomorrow, booked a hotel, and slept for a few hours before making the 2-hour drive from Boston to Kent. I was completely wired the whole way, partly from all the caffeine I'd consumed to make up for my sleepless night and partly because I was already obsessed with this case and determined to solve it. I arrived in Kent, Massachusetts, again, a totally fictionalized location, the next morning and met Jerry, per an email, at a diner. He gave me as much information as he felt like he could. Now that I'm off the force and they can't fire me, I had to do something. This case, it haunts my nightmares. I don't want them taking away my pension, I don't even know if they can, come to think of it, but I'll tell you what I can. I spent the next few days driving around Kent, talking to whomever I could, digging as deep as I could. I had the sense from talking to Jerry that the police department probably wouldn't be thrilled to talk to me, so I kind of skirted around the edges until I figured out what I was dealing with. And it was not at all what I expected. Here's what I know about this case. On Halloween, 2015, Kent High School held their annual Halloween football game. Ashley, Rose, and Matt were all involved in the game, Matt as starting kicker and Ashley and Rose cheering. After the game, most of the football and cheerleading teams, as well as other Kent High students, convened at another student's house for a party. This was the kind of house where the parents never seemed to be around, and indeed they were on vacation this particular weekend. Somewhere between 12:30 in the morning, when Rose left the party, and 8 a.m., 3 students were dead, brutally murdered. Victor Knight was suspected because he was the little brother of another cheerleader, Haley Knight, who had killed herself the previous spring after relentless bullying by the cheerleaders. And even though he was 4 years younger, Victor seemed to feel protective over his sister, and he was furious with the way she was treated. He had threatened violence against the kids who messed with his sister, more than once. Jerry called Victor troubled, by which he meant that Victor was a withdrawn, sullen teenager, who didn't have a ton of friends and spent most of his free time playing video games. He was chronically late or absent from school, and had a perpetual bad attitude. He gave all his teachers crap for everything from assigning homework to forcing him to participate in gym. He claimed to hate everyone except for a very small minority, which included his sister. Victor was devastated by her death, and blamed her bullies, which probably wasn't entirely wrong, although there's a lot of evidence that Haley was severely depressed, and he talked about, in Jerry's words, avenging her. Immediately I was suspicious of this theory. Victor Knight was 11 when 3 varsity athletes, at least 6 years older than him, were murdered. I remembered my little brother at 11, when he weighed like 70 pounds and couldn't have beat me in an arm wrestle. Victor Knight, however, was nothing like my scrawny little brother. I got my hands both the middle and high school yearbooks from the spring of 2015, before the crime was committed. Ashley and Rose were both flyers on the cheerleading team, the ones who get thrown up into the air, and they were both extremely petite. I found a picture of Matt, too, and he was the smallest member of the football team by a large margin. It was like the 3 tiniest varsity athletes in that high school were murdered that night. And Victor was about 5'8" and 180 pounds at 11 years old. There's a picture of him in that yearbook standing with the wrestling team, and he's head and shoulders above everyone else except the coach. And, as a wrestler, he was strong and agile. Suddenly it didn't seem so weird that he could have done this. But it didn't matter, right? Because he had an alibi.